So we've got a focus today on punishments from throughout the Middle Ages through the early modern period. Were they terrifying and harsh to deter criminals? Or they, you might, and there's parts to this question. If you're clever, you can break it down. First of all, part of this question kind of assumes that punishments were terrifying and harsh. Were they all terrifying and harsh? And if they were terrifying and harsh, or whatever they were they to deter criminals? So there's two parts. It's assuming punishments were terrifying and harsh, and it's assuming that punishments were meant to deter criminals through the period. And kind of those two aspects of how far do you agree you've got to consider here. You've got to fill out your sheet to help you, and on that sheet you've got deter. Obviously you've got to write about where crimes were there to deter. Humiliate, and humiliating crimes also have element of deterring others. So there's a lot of crossover there. Maybe a big difference might be remove the criminal from society or reform the criminal, and there's very few of those in this period, but maybe a bit towards the end. So I'm not going to talk to you about the Middle Ages punishments. We've done that before. I'm going to talk to you about the early modern things. And first on your sheet is the ducking stool, and that was particularly used for women. Women, you weren't allowed to talk back to your husbands. If a woman was getting out of hand, husband could report them to the local authorities, who, whether that was the town watchman if it's a town, or the constable, or the justice of the peace, and the woman could be punished in a different way. They could be put. So the ducking stool is where they stuck on something like on a pivot. You can see a picture of it if you've got the page in front of you, and a few men would push it down, and the woman would be up in the air. Swing her out over in the river, let go, under the water, she's going, let her out, she's soaking wet and freezing cold, and then she's just got time to go, and then she's straight back under again. So it would be quite scary, really, because you could drown, start choking on water. They're not going to let you drown. It's not a punishment that's capital punishment, but it's not going to be very pleasant, and also quite humiliating. They also have something called a scald. It's not in the textbook, but it's like a big metal thing which you put over a woman's head, and there's a bit on the metal structure with a metal bit that sticks in your mouth and goes under your tongue and makes you, so you can't talk, but makes you dribble because it keeps your mouth open, and it's got like a lead attached to the front, so you would lead the woman around the town, humiliating again, because she'd be dribbling and she'd have this on to say she's started answering back, she's got out of disobeyed her husband or argued with her husband, or swore in public. That's another one. So that's the ducking stool, and that was from the 1600s. So that's right in the last century of the period that you're looking at. Transportation as well, from the 1660s, so it's in the last 40 years. And that's one that goes into remove the criminal from society. So one way of dealing with crime, there's all sorts of different reasons for punishments, but this one is, all the people who are obeying the law, they don't deserve to have this person in their society, so let's take them and move them somewhere else, out of sight, out of mind. In the early modern period, at the end, in those last 40 years, people would be transported to America if they were going to be sent anywhere. And once they were there, it was a bit like they had to be like a slave. There were people there who were in control of them. It was like, in America, it wasn't like America now at all. It was just a land without much there at all. And they'd be put to work, and it wouldn't be very pleasant. But it was still viewed by people in England as a soft option rather than the death penalty. Carting, basically you would tie somebody to a cart and drag them around the streets on the back of a horse for people to see and shame the criminal and point and laugh at them. Again, humiliating. It could be used if you were running a brothel, so basically a pimp. It could be used if you were an adulterer, so cheating on your wife or husband. Particularly if you cheat on your husband, women got the most likely to be punished for those sorts of things. Being a vagabond, and it was kind of fair game. They're dragged along the back. Nobody's going to stop you throwing stuff at these person on the back of the cart. And that's carting, and it's about humiliation. When we're talking about deterring, so humiliation and deter, they go hand in hand, and I might be tempted to do a paragraph of 3 paragraphs, one that is for deterring criminals through humiliation, because that's very closely tied. But when we're talking about deter, it's not to deter the criminal who's been caught, it is, but it's also to make sure all the people who are watching and humiliating this person also go, I won't fancy that. such as to put off people who might think about being criminals in the future. House of Correction is very unique, because a House of Correction is designed to try to reform the criminal, to change their behaviour. It was very often used for vagabonds, unmarried mothers, repeat offenders, sent to a place. The first one was called Brideswells, and they had to do ridiculously hard work, and they were whipped whilst they were doing it sometimes, especially if they weren't working hard enough. The idea was that it would teach them the value of hard work. I don't really understand the logic there, but it would put them off from wanting to end up there again, I would imagine. But it's got a House of Correction to correct their behaviour. Now, in terms of if you're doing a paragraph on reforming the criminal, there's not much that you can talk about other than that, really. Except for all of them seem to have an element that if you give a punishment to somebody, it's to put them off wanting to be like that again and to change their character. But the main one in terms of reform is the House of Correction. Whipping on market day. So why did they do it on market day? Most people were there. People from the surrounding villages would come along on market day. And it was a common thing for vagabonds. Drunkenness, theft of low-value goods as well as on there. So yeah, it was a punishment in itself that would hurt the criminal, make them not want to do it again, but loads of people would be watching. It would deter them, perhaps, from wanting to commit the crime. And finally, prisons, because they're not like they are now. A House of Correction actually is more like a prison now. Prisons then were just kept for people who were in trial mostly, but also people who were in debt. And that's a difficult one, isn't it? If you're in debt and you're stuck in prison, how the heck are you going to get the money to pay your debt? You could be there for a very long time. So those are some of the bits and pieces that we talked about. Yeah, as I say, my little advice there is I'd probably do a paragraph that is about deterring and humiliating one. So I'd say, yeah, punishment for terrifying has to deter criminals. And part of the way of deterring criminals or people from committing crime is through humiliating people in front of large audiences. Oh, stocks and pillories, of course. There's an extra bit there. It's in the book. I don't know if you've noticed. Why did they get put in there? Well, it was a crime, usually, that would upset other people. So if you were cheating people at cards, if you were selling underweight bread, doing something that would annoy the general community, like, oh, you're doing that to everybody, that's not on. And so people in the stocks would, stuff like that, you can do what you like to them, stocks and pillories. But also sometimes sexual crimes, people were put in there, so rapists and things like that. And sometimes those people, because they were fair game, nobody's going, hey, don't throw things at them. It was like, they're stuck in that stocks for a reason, for a day, they're fair game. So sexual crimes, sometimes those people stuck in the pillories would end up dead, because people would throw bricks and rocks and just beat them until they died from what happened. So that must have been, it would deter other people from wanting to do that, of course. Certainly not going to reform the persons. It's mostly about deterring and humiliating the people in the stocks. So there we go. And you've got to think about where you put the ticks. I've given you some clues. There we go.